what's wrong
up.
with the blacks?
Nothing's wrong with the blacks as a race. Nothing. I mean, there are good African Americans. There are not so good African Americans. There are good white people, not so good white people. You know,
Where are
it's
they?
a hard question. Where are they?
Well,
I know.
good blacks.
I know plenty of African Americans who are wonderful people.
Really?
Several who are judges, and they're doing a great job on the bench.
That make me nervous.
Why?
To have a black judge,
What's wrong with that?
I might well throw myself in jail already. What's wrong with the blacks?
Nothing's wrong with the blacks as a race. Nothing. I mean, there are good African Americans. There are not so good African Americans. There are good white people, not so good white people. You know,
Where are
it's
they?
a hard question. Where are they?
Well,
I know.
good blacks.
I know plenty of African Americans who are wonderful people.
Really?
Several who are judges, and they're doing a great job on the bench.
That make me nervous.
Why?
To have a black judge,
What's wrong with that?
I might well throw myself in jail already.
No, not at all. They'll listen. I mean, the ones I'm thinking of will listen. They'll apply the law.
But
And
they hate white people. They believe in affirmative action. They believe in reparations. They believe in slavery and Jim Crow.
not
and they're
all
very
black.
judgmental.
Jesse, not all blacks.
Well, I know there are some that
Yeah.
are not like Justice Clarence Thomas. You know who he is?
Of course.
I met with him several times. Amazing
Yeah, I've never met him.
human being and an amazing judge. So
Okay.
there are a few sprinkled here and there. But how will you tell the good ones from the bad ones that they all look alike?
Well, they don't all look alike, and you got to talk to them. That's how you find out.
And so the blacks that are attacking the whites and robbing their homes and fighting for reparations and all this mess, what's wrong with them?
Well, the ones who are robbing, engaging in home invasion robberies or pulling
Carjacking.
211s, carjackings, why does anybody become a criminal? Some because it's mental health issues. Some because the family was not very good. They were abused as kids.
Yeah.
They don't know any better.
Yeah.
They never had a chance. Why anybody becomes a criminal, it depends. I mean, they're unhappy for their own reasons, if you will. To paraphrase, what was the book, the Russian novel that started that? I want to say Anna Karenina. All happy families are happy for the same reasons. Unhappy families are unhappy for their own reasons.
Yeah.
You become a criminal for your own reasons. But
And so should we give the blacks reparations and affirmative action? Should we cut that out so they can learn to stand on their own 2 feet?
affirmative action is dead.
It's dead?
It's been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme
But they
Court.
still do it anyway.
Well, then, if that's the case, they're not following the law, or they're skirting the law in some way or other that may or may not be legal. But affirmative action has been ruled unconstitutional, and we have to follow the law of the land, which is what the Supreme Court has ruled. So, what I feel about it is almost irrelevant at this point. Reparations, depends on what we mean by reparations.
They mean money.
Well, there are other things you can do. Like, for example, the family that lost their land in Manhattan Beach back, I believe, in the 20s.
Right.
All right, that was given back to them. I have no quarrel with that, none whatsoever. The land was taken from them wrongly. They were, and the government gave it back, said, look, we apologize. This was a real act of racism, inappropriate. Here's your property back. Now, I think what they've done is sold it, which is fine. They have a right to do that.
Yeah, they sold it. I saw it in the local news.
They have a right to do that.
Yeah.
But I have no quarrel about that whatsoever. We can, and that's a different subject from giving somebody who never had a slave in the family money. I can see the case being made for it, but I can see the case very easily being made against that.
Amazing.
It's hard to say. I mean, reparations is a very tricky, slippery subject.
Do you love white people?
Do I love white people? As much as anybody. There are white people I love, and a lot of white people, like some of these mass shooters, I don't. And it's interesting, Jesse, how many mass shooters do we have who are non-white? Most of them seem to be disaffected white males.
No. Blacks commit mass shooting every day.
Well, okay, I hear what you're saying.
So
and it doesn't get
many,
into and it doesn't get into the newspapers.
Right.
But the ones that get in
Yeah.
the papers, you have disaffected white people.
They'll put the white people in the paper, but not the black.
That's true.
Is that fair?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Let me ask this.
Let me suggest a book for you.
Okay.
Which I just finished reading. It's by a professor at Harvard, Michael Sandel. He wrote a book called The Tyranny of Merit. And it talks about why people, especially uneducated white males, uneducated meaning they didn't go to college or might not have even made it out of high school, why do they feel so disaffected, angry, disrespected? And he really delves into it in a good way and talks about it. And he's long on analysis, short on recommendations, but some of the recommendations he has are pretty good.
How do you feel about how do you feel about the hatred that's being put up on white people today in their own country? They've been blamed for everything, and they're being discriminated against. They're called racist. They're being to blame for anything that goes wrong in the country. They're blaming on white people. If white people should speak up and say, no, that's not true, they take the white people's stuff. They call them racism. How do you feel about the hatred toward the white population?
Well, you're describing an argument that is not logical.
What do you mean?
It's overly simplistic. And if you went the other way and said, oh, it's always because of black people, I'd give you the same answer, okay? If somebody says, oh, it's just because white people are wrong, or I think it was Susan Sontag who said white people are the cancer of the human race. I think it was Sontag. Again, don't quote me.
Right.
But this is, I guess, a function of what? Guilty liberalism, not ignorance, overly simplistic analysis. It doesn't make sense if you really put it under a microscope.
Right.
But at the same time, the argument going the other way, oh, it's because of the blacks are doing this and they're the cause of all the trouble. Same reaction. It lacks logic. It's overly simplistic, based on prejudice.
But I grew up in let me ask you this, then I'll tell you where I grew up. So I see this advertisement sometime on TV where it says, be aware of racism or something like that.
Okay.
And it said, be aware of racism against the Jew, or hatred against the Jews, and against the Mexicans, and against the blacks, and against the Asian or somebody like that. Racism is always wrong, hatred always wrong. But I notice that they leave out white people whenever they talk about people being discriminated against, being attacked. They never mention white being attacked. Why is that? When it's so apparent that it is, why don't, if this is going to add all the other cultures into the being attacked, why not add the white people
They
in there
should.
too? But why do you think they don't?
Some people would then call it a racist ad. Some people would say the ad lacks authenticity or genuineness, that could be any one of any number of reasons. Some people would say it's not a politically correct thing to say. Okay?
But they still should add them anyway, even though there are people going to complain about it like they do about anything. But to be fair to white people, since this is their country, they founded this country, they created this country, and if it wasn't for white people, none of us would be here.
Well, when you say when you say they founded and created the country, there were a lot of people here to begin with, Native Americans for openers.
But they weren't doing anything. They were sitting around smoking pot.
No, they weren't. They were running their own. They had their own societies, and the Native American nations actually were fairly democratic.
But they
some were not. Some were not.
anything.
Some were run by caciques, but some were extremely democratic, almost isocracies. It depends again on what tribe you're talking about. But they were, doing very well in many areas.
Doing well how?
Self-sustaining.
But they were living in the woods in a hut. A tent.
Well, they were happy about it. They were surviving. They were thriving.
But they were fighting each other. They were warring amongst each other. They were killing one another, raping and robbing and doing all kind of
some tribes
evil things, right?
Some tribes were.
But the white people brought peace into their lives.
Well, not General Custer.
He was tough.
He was. He was.
Maybe he was Donald Trump's daddy.
I'll live with that suggestion.
But why don't people of color, of all color, give credit to white people for, with the help of God, creating the Constitution, the greatest country in the world, freedom? Why don't they give
Jesse,
more?
in this country, it goes back to slavery.
What do you mean?
Well, white people enslaved non-whites, okay?
Right.
So I think
everybody enslaved somebody at some point.
that's true. Romans enslaved, North Africans.
Blacks enslaved blacks.
Oh, no question. And blacks sold blacks into slavery. No
Right.
question. It's a very complicated, messy history.
So why don't they give credit to white people in white world, Europe and America, for creating such great countries that everybody and their mama want to come to? The borders are overflowing, and everybody want to come here, but yet they come and then they blame the white man for their unhappiness.
Well, there are a lot of reasons, and we can sit here and analyze them, but I don't think we're going to come to the reason.
I know
we
the
can
reason.
sit here and what do you, when you say what is it?
It's the hatred of the heart. They don't have love. And when you have anger, you don't have love, and you're always blaming somebody else for your failure.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have love, you don't blame anyone.
Very possible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, very possible.
Do you believe that slavery have anything to do with the failure of black people that are so angry and out of control? Or is it in the home?
It's a little of everything, including the Jim Crow laws, which came after Reconstruction. They hurt a lot.
How?
They treated blacks as inferior. It was a form of ersatz slavery.
Where?
In the South.
What
and
part?
in many ways, I would say right across the southern part of the United States, and even into areas like California. I mean, think about the segregation. When you would take a train back even in the 50s, if you took a train from, say, Jackson, Mississippi to Los Angeles, you would get on the train in Los Angeles, and there'd be blacks and whites in the same cars.
Right.
When you crossed into Texas, a light would go on. And the light in the car meant you are now in a segregated area. The blacks have to move into their own car.
Right.
Okay? That's segregation, pure and
But
simple.
what's wrong with that?
Everything was wrong with that.
Like what?
Why do you classify people based on race? What's the point?
But then that's what blacks are doing today to the whites. The universities and things like that, they want black dormitory. They want black graduation. They don't want to be with the whites. They want this and that. Are they evil for doing that?
Well, they won't tell you they're evil. Many of them really just want to kind of set up their own control, their own identities, their own strengths, if you will. And once that's happened, then meet whites on equal terms.
But was that
could be
that
an explanation.
wrong?
Sorry?
Is that wrong for them doing that?
Depends on the reasons they're doing it.
But
If
so-
it's based on hatred, yes, it's wrong. If it's based on some other reason, it may not be. You have to ask them.
So was it wrong when the train would cross over to the south and the blacks had to go in their
Yes.
train? But why was that wrong but not wrong for the blacks to do it to the whites today?
Because back then it was done by law, by operation of law, with assumptions that blacks were inferior.
But the blacks get away with it now because they're protected by the law to discriminate against the whites.
But it's different.
But it's not wrong
It depends on why they're doing it.
because they hate white people.
Some do, some don't.
But-
if it's because of hatred, yes, it's wrong.
But
If it's
why
for some
not-
other reason, no.
Well, why-
I remember I took a class in college called Black Theater, taught by an African-American professor. And we had blacks and whites in the class. And at one point, the professor said, look, we're going to split the class because the blacks need their own space to develop their own style of drama and theater. Okay?
Well, man.
I wasn't happy about it, but I could understand it, and it would be different if he had said something like, we want the blacks out of the class because the whites are better, and they can't perform as well with you here dragging them down. Okay? Different logic.
But I don't understand why you're saying that it's okay for the blacks to separate themselves from the whites in the universe or wherever, but it wasn't okay for the train to stop and the blacks had to go in their train and the whites go in there. why wasn't it okay for the whites to do it if the blacks can do it? It doesn't make sense.
Well, no,
if it's wrong, it should be. Have you're
Jesse,
old enough to hear about the goose and the gander, right?
Yeah.
So why, when it's good for the
different.
goose, should be good for the gander?
Well, we start with the fact that it happened on the trains because that was the law. And the law was pure, it was
but
wrong.
it's the law now because the blacks can get away with it.
Again, different. We're going in a circle here. We're going in a circle.
You gotta be going in circles. The only reason that blacks, not the only reason, but one of the primary reasons that black people lost their way was because of the civil rights movement. The worst thing, other than abortion, that has ever happened to the blacks was the civil rights movement. If the civil rights movement had never happened, black people would be much better off today because they sold their lives over to the so-called civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, all those crappy people. They gave their lives over to them, and then they sold them over to the Democratic Party. It's just been downhill. Blacks have not stopped begging and whining.
Martin Luther King was one of the most respected people, in the United States.
They always respect the devil.
He certainly wasn't a devil in my mind, I'll tell you that. I heard him speak on May 31, 1964.
Right.
I heard him speak in the LA Coliseum. And I got to tell you, he was fantastic. He was spellbinding. And what he said made a lot of sense. He was a very great man. I remember where I was when he was assassinated. I was at a small seminar back in college. I had tears in my eyes when I got the news.
But you heard Obama speak too, right?
Yeah.
The devil's speaking. The devil speak what you want to hear.
Well, Obama's a very different person. First of all, you got to admit he's one of the very best speakers we've ever had in the presidency.
The devil's children are always the best speakers.
Well, okay. I mean, look, I don't agree with everything Barack Obama said or did either, but he was in many ways a very decent president and a decent man. Yeah, I think so.
Do you see what's happening to the country as a result of Barack Obama? It has been downhill ever since.
Okay. So you would say that Donald Trump wasn't the best president either.
Donald Trump is the best. I call him the great white hope.
Oh my, the Jack Johnson of politics.
What's that?
He was the Great White Hope, the play. Jack Johnson was the boxer.
And so is Donald Trump.
Okay, reasonable minds can differ. Pardon me?
Did you vote for him?
Well, how one casts his political vote is a privileged piece of information.
You're right about that.
In fact, you can't, it's under our evidence code, you can't ask the question.
If you didn't, God is giving you another chance this year to vote for the great white hope. Don't miss the chance. There might not be another train after this one.
Well, as I said, reasonable minds might differ about that.
Wait,
but
are you saying my mind is not reasonable?
No, you have a reasonable mind. Donald Trump is, there are things that he did as president we can agree with, things he did we don't agree with.
Are you able to name one thing, because of time, one thing that you disagree with that he did?
Well, I don't want to get into this for one reason, the code of judicial ethics.
Oh, okay.
We're not allowed to get political.
That's right.
Right now I'm skirting the line,
I
don't want to go further in.
I don't want to get you in trouble with the blacks.
Or with anybody. Or with anybody. So
that's right.